My name is Henry Wolfe. I'm a retired postal employee of 36 years. I've been in Detroit for 56 years. I'm from Jackson, Mississippi. I grew up in a segregated state. The capital of Mississippi, Jackson. It was real segregated. You lived in fear, walked in fear, even talked in fear. Yes, taught school for 31 years. Was a principal of a school. And she worked until she retired. Yes, from 1943 to 1946. I was drafted in the Army and served in the South Pacific for 14 months before returning back to the States. Yes, South, New Guinea, French Haven, Oro Bay, Miller Bay, all in New Guinea area. And in fact, there's a combat zone that I was in, but no fighting though. Oh yes, plenty of discrimination. That's, that's, okay, segregated. We couldn't eat at restaurants. We said it's all white. No blacks could go there. They also segregated us in the army too. We were segregated everywhere in the mess halls where we ate. In the mess hall we went to where they had whites, where they separated us. Or else we couldn't eat there, period. All that lasted until after I retired. Now hear about the rest. Well, I felt a little relieved, but the segregation still stood as usual. Everything was black here and white there. Yes, white only, drinking fountain, restrooms, hotels, restaurants, everything was segregated, still segregated. Riding on the bus it was still segregated. Because Bilbo, we wanted to vote because when we went in, we were in the army. In fact, we were told that you weren't a citizen unless you voted. And we spread the message for students in school. All the men that had just left had been retired, not only retired, but had been discharged from the U.S. Army. And we said we're going to organize a march and go down and testify against Bilbo in the Hinds County Courthouse because he had made a threat that wasn't over 3 or 4 niggers going to be there, so it wouldn't affect me at all. But 400 of World War II veterans got together, and I led the march, actually. We walked down Capitol Street, the main street in Jackson, Mississippi, and marched to the Hinds County Courthouse, and the testimony started, and the day was set. And we had testimonies from all over Mississippi, all Magnolia, Mississippi, Hattiesburg, Brandon, Mississippi. We even had a fella testify named Etor Fletcher they thought was dead because that was about 10 miles from Jackson where he lived. He was beaten with the wire cable, and they thought the man was dead. But my brother and Miles, first name I can't recall now his first name, but his name was Miles. Got him that night before the testimony and brought him there, and he was the first testimony of the day. Etor Fletcher from Brandon, Mississippi, and he was treated, and by a veterinarian doctor for his bruises. But they didn't know if he was alive or not, and they was really shocked when he said, the first testimony today is Etor Fletcher, and he testified how he was treated and was beaten and left for dead. And then from there on, they came to my testimony. We had testimonies from Magnolia, Mississippi, where they were threatened when he went to the polls to try to vote, try to get registered. He didn't go to before he went to the polls. He tried to register, and he was told that if he didn't get away from that nigger, that he would be killed. So he testified that particular day. We had a man from Tougaloo College named Bender testified. Percy Green, an editor for the newspaper, Jackson Advocate newspaper, was testimony. We had a lot of testimony. That's just a few, a number that I can recall. Well, Senator Billboard was a known segregationist which spoke out against black folk trying to vote. If they attempted to register, if they did get registered, which a lot of them didn't, we'd go to the polls the night before, and tar and feather would be the next step. And you know what's next. Those were his comments. And that really upset the veterans that knew that they're supposed to have a right to vote. Because they would learn that in the Army, that you weren't a citizen unless you did vote. Therefore, we got together and marched down Capitol Street and went to the Hinds County Courthouse and voted. That, and he stole war contract money from the government. Those two unseated Billboard. He never took his seat. He left there and went to New Orleans Hospital. And the next 2 months, he was gone. Good Lord took him home. Well, in the article they tell you that scores of Negroes turned out to testify against Billboard about his intimidating speeches and his threat to the Negro voters. They didn't want the Negroes to vote, period. He only had, out of 55,000, he only had about 400 voters. And those people is like doctors, lawyers, and a few principals of schools. That's the only one was able to vote then. Everybody else was disallowed to vote, weren't allowed to vote. And by us being in the Army, World War II, we was exempt from poll tax. So when we did scuffle at the precincts in order to get registered, we finally got registered, most of us, and we voted. I'll never forget, I voted at Billboard's home on Robertson Street in Jackson, Mississippi in 1947. That's the first time I voted. My mother and father never voted. They didn't live to vote. But most of the people didn't vote. But now you have 3/4 of the people in Mississippi voting. On that note, they started voting right after then because the law was passed that they couldn't deny us from voting again. But it took courage for us to do that. But we did it. Poll tax was for to help the school kids that rode buses. And all white rode buses. No Negroes didn't ride buses going to school. If they did, they had to own their own buses. But the state, that's a state poll tax. We paid poll tax for the white folk, but that's been eliminated now. From that time, a lot of folk was, we had people that lost their life mentioned that they wanted to get registered and vote, and they were killed. I know ministers that were killed. In Yazoo City, Mississippi, 45 miles from Jackson. They were murdered. And like I said, a lot of folk was beaten when they talked about voting. They weren't allowed to even talk about it. But after that, we broke the fright right there. That was a fright to everybody. But after that, they've been voting ever since.
Wonderful.
That's been 57 years ago.
Wonderful.
Yes, I believe that, because that was actually 8 years before they got the drive on, a voting drive on, and the bus boycott by Rosa Parks was in '55, and so we were way ahead of that time. But they did do a lot, because I think we got the ball rolling.
Very good.
Well, I would like to say that voting is a powerful weapon, and that you should vote. And I argue with people on my job. I worked for the post office 36 years, and we had people here in Detroit didn't want to vote. They say there's nothing to vote. And I said, people have lost their life trying to vote. They tell me that it doesn't matter. I said, yes, it matters, because unless you vote, you're not a citizen. And they said, what am I? I said, you're nothing. I said, you're nothing. Because I said, you may be a citizen by birth, but you're not an actual citizen. You can't participate in anything. Your voice doesn't count. Yeah. So I think it made a difference.
Absolutely.
Mm-mm. I like to say that if you hear a person say, don't vote, just tell them you're not a citizen of America if you don't vote. And they say, why? They say, because you're not counted. You're considered as nothing. And your voice doesn't mean a thing. And thank you very much for having me on your program.